Alrighty, welcome to Nikos, everybody. I'm Jonathan Albin. I am your host, and this is Game Master's Soapbox, a nightly podcast and Twitch channel show showcasing a lot of different topics that I find near and dear as a game master, and therefore I get up on my soapbox and go to town. Today we are going to be talking about the following subjects. I'm not going to read them all off, but we're going to be starting off dealing with games, dealing with adults, and you'll see several themes in here that are going to kind of carry through that have to do with this initial topic, and that's kind of the way I'm going to package these things from this point going forward. So, the first thing I want to do is talk about the concept of playing games with adults, and if you use the term playing games in the world today, it has a myriad of different colloquial meanings. People say when they are dating, they don't want to meet somebody who wants to play games. And of course, what they're referring to is that they're referring to people that are playing dramatic games with each other's emotions and teasing and then being a negative and all kinds of weird things. Playing games with adults, though, is specifically what I am addressing here in this topic, and that is the actual participation in game events with other adults. And while I do game master for some minors in a group setting, I don't particularly cater to running events for specifically younger folk, although I probably could. And I don't necessarily play exclusively adult games, and certainly no one would accuse me of being too adult myself when it comes to the experience of the role play games that I run. But when I speak here about playing games with adults, I'm talking about the fact that when you are a person who has never played a role playing game, which I imagine some of you that are watching this have never even considered playing a role play game, and so I'm going to kind of tempt you to do so, because when you are in a role play experience, it's like nothing you've done since you were in grade school, actually. And that sounds like a big stretch, but the reality is that when we play role play games, we are actually hearkening back to those earliest years of our lives when we could activate our imagination and live in that space for a limited amount of time and experience and exhibit the tendencies of the persons that we were emulating or imagining ourselves to be. So in a role-playing game, you do get that opportunity. So when you are going to participate in a role-playing game, or you're going to sit down at a table to play a role-play game, quite often the players have to be a little sensitive towards one another because they don't know what the boundaries are, what the dividing lines and the permission lines are. And so realize that playing games with adults is a different kind of an event than it would be, say, watching a sporting event with adults or drinking adult beverages with adults. Those different social behaviors have different mechanical rules, and so with your first session, and particularly in a condition where you were never played a role play game before, you have to kind of get your toes wet first and whatever. So the idea here is that playing games with adults spans a lot of different categories. So if you have never played a role-playing game with someone else, think back to the times that you've played other games, whether it be a board game or a game of cards, or maybe a social game like charades, or that kind of thing where you're engaging with adults in a playful way, following rules, which is fundamentally what a game is. And then now you have to extend that to what are you going to do when you can actually unlock your imagination and be creative. Playing games with adults, therefore, does require some concept of boundaries and barriers, but you have to figure out what those are as you participate, because you won't know what your difficulties or challenges will be until you're involved with them. So the question is, do you want to play games specifically with adults, or is it an environment where you could participate with kids? I mean, if you're playing in a mixed group of males and females, men and women, the players who have a specific experienced with role play are going to be more liberated and more free to act in those situations, and that maybe make you feel more uncomfortable, and so you have to acclimate to the process. But it really is important to realize that when you are playing games with adults, there will be conversational pieces that may be more stressful than they would be if it were an event where you are going to have a mixed group of ages to include younger folk. Therefore, when you look at playing games with adults and playing games with kids, there is a difference in the dynamic. So the subject matter is going to be different. The topics might be a little bit more adult. The concepts will certainly be more sophisticated, and certainly the humor will either be completely broken and therefore they're the lowest common denominator and still be considered adult, or it will be too sophisticated for the younger folk to follow along. So just realize that the dynamics of playing games, role playing games or otherwise with adults, is a considerably different animal than it would be with the younger folk. So the next topic I want to cover is the concept of a long arc adventure or serialized play. Now, a long arc, by obvious definition, means that week over week play is going to tell one story across a span of time, whether it be a few episodes or an ongoing campaign style event. And in today's world, a lot of times role players and game masters even won't be able to differentiate the terms. And so they will consider a game that they run week over week over week to be a campaign, even if the specific events and conditions of this setting change every week. So the difference between a long arc and a serialized campaign is that a long arc means that every episode follows directly on the heels of the previous one. The characters are generally sustained from one week to the next week to the next week, and therefore the actions are building the chronology of those characters' particular lives. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to cover every day of an existence. I mean, we don't even really think of it that way in terms of what we do. When we go on vacation, we say we're going to be on a 2-week vacation. And from the work standpoint, we are away from the work space for that period of time, and therefore we don't have any progress or advancement or activity in the work environment for that period of time. That means, in like fashion, when you were playing a role play game, you might have an adventure where you say, we're going to travel from point A to point B, and it's going to be in a relatively safe location, and there's no real reason to track the minute by minute. And so therefore we can forego that entire week of time, and the characters will still have lived it per se, but you don't necessarily keep track of your minute by minute activities over the longer haul. Unlike that, a serialized event would be a game where the only things that happen in the session are those that are important and pertinent to the story, regardless of when and where they happen. So a serialized adventure might have activity on one day per week in real time, but it might be 2 or 3 months or even 6 months to a year between sessions for the characters. And this is important from the standpoint of which is going to be capturing the nuance of what you as the game master or you as the collective body of players want from your game. A long arc story tends to be more personalized and more visceral and internalized. You can actually think of it in terms of what you are doing on a day-to-day basis as that persona. But in a serialized event, you literally are at the whim of the storyteller to say, well, it's been 2 years since you adventured, or it's been 3 days or 20 minutes. Whatever that framework is, the storyteller who is bringing the event to you to play is determining the sequence of that, and therefore you have to have that discussion about which your group is actually playing. Now, there's actually a third type of event, and I didn't mention it here in particular, but there are the true one-shots, and that's a story the game master wants to tell that can be done in one episode or maybe at most two, and it's going to be one and done, and therefore it doesn't necessarily mess with or break the continuity of the other sessions. So if you're playing a campaign that really isn't a campaign, it's just a serialized group. I mean, it's just a serial, episodic, single shot adventures, then it really doesn't have to worry about the chronology. You could actually play a character in advance of years and then the next week play him when he was a teenager. It doesn't much matter in the one off form of role play because the timeline isn't necessarily set in stone. Now, when you have chosen which style you want to play, then it's a issue of maintaining the continuity and making sure what you are playing is what you intended to play. So if you are intending a long arc, then you need to consider what's going to happen if there's a 3-week lull in the game. What kind of things will the players find themselves doing in that meantime? Are there reasons for that break in action to have occurred? And with the possibility that there is such a thing, then you have the ability to perhaps add in extra scenes that are not part of your story, simply to eat up the time, so to speak, between planned action A and planned action B. So it's a matter of how you want to do that. So when you're making a decision about what style you want to play, realize there are really 3. I've only written 2 here. But the 3 are the long arc, serialized. Every episode is one after the other in an episodic fashion. Second is serialized, where each encounter matters, but it is not necessarily in any kind of chronological specified order. And then the one-off, or one-shot, which is set up so that the timing is non-specific and the characters can actually shift up and down in level and complexity of the encounter depending on what the storyteller and the players want to do. It's up to you. It's up to your game master, your storyteller to negotiate with you which of those you want to play. For my part, I am a long arc storyteller, which means every episode is fundamentally directly following on the tails of the last one, with small amounts of gap between them that make it make sense. But generally, it's so that the story has a continuity week over week that can be measured and dealt with in a player versus environment system methodology. All right. Now we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to many people's hearts, and that is a player brings to the table a particular adventure character build that they have got their heart set on and have done the weeks of pre-game research and data mining to make sure that they've got all of the possible skills and abilities they want to learn and the order in which they wish to pick up those various skills and feats so that they can get the maximum value out of the character. And so here's the magic, the special sauce that I use in handling broken builds like that is I don't care. It's really funny, the role-playing environment that allows a gamer to build a character pre-planned for what they want to accomplish still depends on essence of story from the game master to fill in the gaps to make such a thing happen. So, for example, if someone does not tell me about their build options and their alternatives and the skills they're going to gain, that's fine. I'm just going to play the game as I would always play the game. If they tell me, they delineate all the things they want to accomplish, that's fine too. Because this is the big secret. Everybody look around and make sure nobody's looking, because I only want to share it with you, not the other 30 million people that might be listening. If you want to know the secret to role-playing game, as a game master, the player's character sheet doesn't really matter. I said it. As a matter of fact, at my table, instead of utilizing any of the dice rolling mechanism limitations that there might be, whether you say, I only want you to use the point build system, or I want to use the stats that the game recommends, or I want you to use 4d6, discard 1, unless it's a pair, in which case you discard half of 1. Whatever your mechanism is, there's really, for Jonathan Albin and for the NycosRPG, one set of rules, and I call it the rule of 18. And you might find it funny. I kind of think it's kind of clever. And I've stated it before, so this won't be new if you've been watching my videos for any length of time at all. Rule 1 is if you have 118 or better, one value higher than 18, bless you. God blesses you. 2 18s. You got two numbers that are 18 or higher. God knows your name. If you have 3 skill attribute numbers that are 18 or higher, God knows where you live. If you have 4 18s or better on your character sheet, then God is going to test you. If you have 5 18s, God must count you as one of his own and be watching you heavily. Or if you've got 6 18s, just hand me the character sheet because you didn't want to play this game anyway. The reality is that the dice rolls on the pages, the pieces, the numbers of the players have to draw against are only valued for you as the game master to make the game challenging to the player. In other words, you get to scale your adventure according to the numbers that the players have revealed as you move along. So a character that does have a moderate number of 18 plus numbers, he's going to be faster, stronger, smarter, etc. than the average bear. So then it would be a matter of how many bears you throw at him, so to speak. You're going to recognize their validity, their willingness to grow towards that particular build. They expend their experience points in that direction. But on the other hand, you don't have to play into that because you can modify the die rolls that they require to succeed and therefore adjust the play levels to be manageable. Having said that, personally, as I've done in one of my rants before, I despise the pre-built, pre-agendized, set in stone course making that many of the meta play people do these days, and it bugs me. But the reality is that any character with any set of numbers, even if they were all 18s, still has to make die rolls, and therefore there's always a percentage chance of their failure. And arguably, in a percentage-based system, it's a little easier to track their growth or their advancement so that you can keep a scale on where they are in terms of their numeric values and therefore adjust accordingly. But the point is that a broken build isn't something to be scared of. As a matter of fact, it should be applauded in a way because the storyteller, the game master, doesn't have to do the work of giving the player a motivation to act. He simply has to establish means to make the required actions make sense to that player. So that's that. Broken builds are not really a problem now. There are ways to resolve them. The easiest way is to say that any skill you wish to advance in the future, any feat you wish to propose that you would receive at a certain point in the game sequence, has to be role played in advance. It has to be part of the story of the character for that number to be a valid die roll mechanism. By the way, a very good friend of mine made me this really cool bug holder. It's a 3D printed device, and he printed it, and it's really, really nice. And so I try to remind everybody about it. His name is Day. They're really cool. Thumbs up for him. So now let's move on to the concept of a min-maxer versus a meta player. Now, I get to put my teeth in and talk about back in my day when we were youngsters, there was lots of people who'd min-max numbers on the character sheet and make it so they'd accomplish everything with ease, and it really frustrated the rest of us who were meddling with little peddling numbers that they rolled legitimately, and those min-maxes would just get to run roughshod over all of us, and it was horrible. Well, this isn't much different from the players today who get involved in the meta game environment. And what I mean when I speak of that are all of the websites that tell players this is the optimal build process to get to the best rogue or the best warrior or the most effective paladin. And in reality, a min-maxer's only real difference is that there were no stipulations on how best to do that. And so obviously you would want to min-max the best of your attributes. But since the attributes now can be advanced in-game by experience point dumps in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, it's kind of less of an issue than it used to be. The biggest challenge to min-max is that the player's purpose in improving or reducing the numbers as required is to give themselves an undue and an ongoing unfair advantage in the session, sort of getting one over on the game master. The meta play individuals aren't necessarily focused on that part. They're not necessarily trying to get at the game master, but instead they are utilizing the tools that Dungeons and Dragons is providing to create a wish fulfillment model instead of a role play model of role play games. And by this I mean the meta game mechanism where they can say, well, at this level I'll gain this skill, and at that level I'll take this certain feat, and when I reach this level of experience points, then I can add this extra special thing or join a different class. All of that is really irrelevant. If it's done in roleplay, it wouldn't be noticed. But if you do it without the roleplay aspect and you simply just start pumping up your dice rolls because you said, well, I took at second level, I took Great Cleave, and with Great Cleave comes the ability to attack a third time. Or whatever the feat is that you're trying to gather. If that doesn't make sense for the character's story arc and it's just an arbitrary boost in numbers, then that's a problem. The game master has to figure out how he wants to resolve that. Now, in NycosRPG, there is none of that. Every skill that the players would like to learn, they can immediately start learning. But the challenge is that the beginning threshold for most skills is fundamentally untenably small. And while there are players that balk and resist it, the reality is that when you first pick up a skill, it is not something that you can go from zero to hero in almost any event. Having said that, therefore, the situation with meta play is perhaps easier to deal with than a true min-maxer, because a min-maxer never has to reveal what it is he's trying to improve, because it may be his attack roll, it might be the amount of damage he does, it might be his ability to carry weight over distance, etc., etc. So the biggest challenge is that when you have a situation and you recognize a meta player, try to turn into the skid, so to speak, and play with them towards their agenda and explain how it's important for those skills to be pre-generated in role play, and therefore behooves them to add those actions in advance of getting the skills. And this helps you to overcome the real problem of min-max or meta play, which is the undue surprise when a player's ability outstrips the monster's capability to protect itself or even be a threat. So now I'm going to tell you a story. We're into story time Nexus. Blah. This did occur in the city of Nexus, so that would sort of make sense for me to have made that Freudian slip. And in the city of Nexus, they were a party of adventurers who had determined that they were going to uh, start a life of crime, and so they had all taken characters with ostensibly a criminal background that they created collectively, that they had been part of a street thug gang when they were kids, basically stirring up money to go to see the plays and the music performances in town. And these hooligans, if you will, had decided that it was time for them to, quote, grow up and move to the big city and begin a life of actual crime. So this is early in my role playing. This must have been when I was 17 or 18, 16 or 17, had to be. And the players were pretty rowdy. I know that one of the things that fed into their ego at that point was they had seen the movie Lost Boys, where Kiefer Sutherland and his pals of evil demons started messing around with the priest in the family of the disinterested girlfriend or whatever. And so in like fashion, this group decided that they were going to start their life of crime by rolling a drunk person. They'd heard that this was something that was done, and they'd never experienced it directly, but they figured they could certainly, between them, take out a poor drunk fellow and go on wealthier for the effort. So when they began their adventure and had gone into the alleyway to wait for the drunken person, I played up a couple of near misses. In other words, one guy came around the corner just to relieve himself since there was no interior toilet, and so that was embarrassing, and had to kind of apologize because they started their run and realized he was considerably more powerful and more dangerous than they were, and so they had to backtrack, and so that was kind of comical. And then the next was a couple that were on their way to a tryst in a hotel room, and of course that for the two young ladies in the group was rather uncomfortable, so they immediately withdrew from that engagement. Then finally, late in the night, the typical wino drunk comes staggering out, having way too much to drink and perhaps imbibing some illicit substances. They were therefore able to follow him into the darkness, and in a short while they'd knocked him unconscious, and he was lying there on the ground bleeding. They went through his pockets and they found that they had a total of 12 copper pieces among them total, and it was quite comical after that, because as they started to discuss what they were going to do with their 12 copper pieces, the guy kept waking up, and so they'd have to take turns basically knocking him back into submission before they could come back and continue the conversation overall. So it was really funny that way. But the upshot of it was that the players learned kind of a hard lesson, and that is the decisions that you make at low level give you a better reflection on what you could or should do as a higher level character. If I recall correctly, they eventually did use their unearned gain and purchased some, I think, drinks around the bar and maybe a couple of trinkets, but nothing of any real value. And before it was done, the person they had beaten up in the street, so to speak, since they hadn't had the heart to actually terminate his life, came wandering in with the guards a bit later and caused a very funny exchange. And while the players did get away, it was a very, very much a learning experience for them, that the way you act towards people will reflect the way society returns the favor later on. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about chase scenes. Now, chase scenes in the theater of the mind are rather engaging type of event to deal with. And in a chase scene, of course, one person is the pursued and the other is a pursuer, and there may be one or more pursuers, or it could even be that a group splits up and there might be more than one pursuee as well. So let's take a look at this. So if you're in a situation in a theater of the mind and you've determined that an NPC 1 is going to be running away from the party of adventurers, well, obvious, the first thing you would think is that you just simply roll a check against dexterity to see if they got a attack of opportunity as the bad guy goes by, so to speak. But if you afford the running person the opportunity to be on horseback or to have a head start or whatever, then you needn't go through that weird detail of having some players know what's going on and the others to be having to wait until time tells them. If you do that, then there's a real simple mathematical equation you can use. If they roll dice that are equal, then the eye goes to the runner, the distance remains the same, and they move on. If the dice goes to the winner, in other words, the person who has the numeric advantage, then that person's vehicle or car gains some distance either towards or away from the enemy. And so you have to start with some kind of measure that can be visualized. And so I use a number line. The number line will be graduated into 4 or 5 sections. Generally, I don't go much above that. My theory is that if you get above 5 sections, then you are pulling away fast enough to allow your maneuver to have gotten you completely away, or conversely, you're now in a collision course and therefore you have to roll for the collision itself. So let's assume that they are one distance away. The enemy took off running and immediately the adventurers take pursuit. So the driver of the vehicle, or the drover in the case of a wagon, or the primary fastest person in the group rolls for his round of action. And let's say he gets a 2 on a D10. He rolled a percentage dice to see whether he got to use his pursuit skill. Let's say he did, and he rolls an 8, and the skill condition gives him an additional +2 to his die roll for the attempt. So therefore, he's made his defense of, say, 14. Then the player who is pursuing him also has to roll, and rolls against the same material with different odds, because now we're talking about the skill of rundown, the skill of chase. And if there's no skill of chase and no skill of running, then both numbers would default to their grace score for the purpose of determining success or failure. So let's say the first player succeeds and the second player rolls the exact same success. Well, that just means the continuation of the run. The pursuer clearly has the pursuee in sight and was able to navigate despite the extra time that was going to be required by the wow. I hope somebody jumps in the channel pretty soon, because I'm starting to drift again, and when I do that, it really drives me crazy. So, chase scene. If the person in the front wins their check, makes their check, and the defense makes their check evenly, there's no change in speed. If the first person, the pursued, gets a success, but the defending person makes a better success, and it makes the better number by more, by less, and therefore he achieves the intent of reducing the distance. And if the distance is only 1, now he's literally hot on his trail. Then the second roll indicates the next period of time. And the second roll, let's say the first person succeeds, but only partially, and the second person succeeds, but he succeeds regularly. Well, that partial versus the regular is another span of distance. But now we're falling into kind of like an Occam's razor period, because he technically can't win the objective because the opponent hasn't lost, but he's winning at a slower pace. So literally he's picking up ground, but it's only mere inches now. So they're right on top of each other. Notice that it doesn't matter how much of a advance or reduction from your primary number. If at any time you succeed and your opponent fails, you have succeeded in capturing them. Or if you're running, you've succeeded in getting away. It literally comes down to the die rolls only represent the proximity of the people till such time either one succeeds or not. And once someone has succeeded, then the conflict switches back from die rolls back to role play, with an addition of consequences, which are conditions that are played on the defender by the offender. So he gets to pick what challenges or difficulties he gets to put on the player that he was chasing, or that was chasing him. With that, therefore, you can have the dynamic, the excitement of getting closer or further away play into it without the clear, well, I've caught up with you and I've won, so therefore you have to stop running. That's the silliness of the current roleplay system, is that a success can mean I've grappled you and you can't move any further, or it means that I've latched onto you and therefore your running doesn't matter anymore. And these are not realistic aspects. So just realize that the chasing comparisons are always done instantaneously and are always comparing the die roll target and the die roll success, and the die roll success that is of the least value, so it's the closest to the target, the better. All right. So now I get to something that'll keep, this may wake me right back up. This is my rant, and this is something that I will often do. I'm going to try to hold it to the next full minute so that we have time to cover it clearly, and not to spend too much time on it. So I'm watching the clock pretty sturdily at this point. Alrighty then, my rant today is about inebriation or intoxication while in a game session. I am an adult human being, and I understand and appreciate the benefits of being an adult. It's okay to be an adult person and partake in things that grown-up people do. But if you have come to my house or come to my table to play a role-play game, do not come to my table either inebriated or intoxicated. If you are on any substance and it has taken you out of your normal mindset and put you into a loopy place, don't come to the table. I get it. I get the understanding of the liberty of freedom of role-play games, and I appreciate it. As a matter of fact, I've had many people that have actually in my life told me at a game session that they ceased drinking, they ceased doing drugs, because the game's story was more of a trip than anything that their little brains would come up with while they were either under the influence of alcohol or other strange substances. But I'm telling you, it is the most frustrating thing in the world to have a person sitting at the table who slurs their words to incoherence, that is throwing inhibitions to the wind and acting in ways that are so rude they cause Navy sailors to blush. The point is don't do it. If you've got a situation where the alcohol is more important to you than the game, then go enjoy your alcohol. Go enjoy your altered substances, go ahead. I don't care. That's fine. But don't bring it to my table. It is not easy to have to deal with somebody who is belligerent because they've had a few extra drinks and they think they are as impervious as the character that they claim that they're representing. I just don't understand what makes people want to engage in that kind of behavior at a role play table. Now, I get it in a way because there are definitely video series of people doing other crazy things when they're drunk, and I suppose there is a level of levity or joy that might be taken from watching somebody else crash and burn this way. But it is not healthy and it's not helpful for the games group for you to be engaged in that behavior while you're coming to play a role play game. It doesn't help any of the players, and it certainly isn't doing your character any favors. One of the reasons why I established the concept of the injunction is that often a player will actually change his behavior if he thinks that harm is going to come to the character in the game. I have players who, when they first began, were very mutant, as I've discussed before, very crazy in their play style, but within a few weeks they realized that those crazy ideas had actually caused harm to their character's advancement. So we don't want people coming to work when they are inebriated or intoxicated. We don't want them coming to a sporting event if they are belligerent because of this. And in the same fashion, I don't want it at my table and I won't handle it. If you come to my table and you are intoxicated, I will ask you to leave. I have done it in times past, and I've actually saved some people, which is a story for a later day. But I've saved people's business careers by preventing them from drinking that bottle of wild turkey they brought to the game to imbibe, and instead they took the bottle home sealed. There's a whole story behind that. But the point I'm trying to make, and I'm trying not to slip off of it, is that my rant is do not think that your role play is somehow enhanced by your being inebriated or intoxicated. It does not help. It causes harm not only to you in terms of respect and understandability and appreciation by other players, but more in the case of the game, you're putting your characters enjoying life in danger because you're going to do something that you're going to regret when you are no longer inebriated. So there, I'm done with my rant. Okay. Okay, so I do want to mention the new podcast that we just started tonight. We did a practice last week, but tonight was the first episode of Session Zero Chronicles. It is my attempt to introduce players and non-players alike to the world of Nykos by introducing the very concepts that a GM would talk about during a Subject Zero session, to introduce you to the concepts, demonstrate some of the rules, mechanisms that might apply, and to explain something about the lore of Nykos so that there is a reason why you'll want to pursue and gather more information. So the first one was on the Inandaran elves. They're one of the first of the Eldrin species, and we talked all about not only where they come from and what cultures they are a part of, but also a snippet of their history and characters that were of note from that species within the NycosRPG long arc story. So I just want to remind you that is every night at 9 p.m. Tomorrow we're going to handle the Grund. That's the first of the dwarf-like species. And today was the Eldrin, the Anandran elves. So with that understanding, make sure you get a chance, if you get a chance, to time in with us at 9 p.m. Pacific here on Twitch. And if you can't match that show, it will be up on YouTube as a separate episode for a new playlist channel. So watch for that. It's going to be the Session Zero playlist. So watch for that to start tomorrow. And I am Jonathan Albin. This has been the Game Master Soapbox. I want to thank you for your participation. If you do get a chance and you like the video, make sure you click the like below. If you want to keep track of when we're doing episodes, click the follow button on Twitch. If you're seeing this on YouTube, go ahead and click the subscribe button so you'll get updates on whenever the new shows become available. If you click the notification button, wow, my tongue stopped working there. The notification button, then you'll be able to know precisely when each episode is dropped. And also be with us tomorrow night for Game Master's Soapbox, where we're going to cover a whole different raft of subjects, and I'm sure we're going to have a great time doing it. So thank you again. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this has been Game Master's Soapbox. Have a great night.